All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining us today for the assessment audit webinar. We're going to go over the process for the assessment audit. We're going to talk through the inquiry form. We'll go over next steps and then have a chance to answer any questions that you might have. Just some housekeeping. We will post this slide deck as well as a recording of this webinar on the academic auditing website on the GOSA site. So you can refer back to that afterward if you would like. And then on your GoToWebinar options, you should see an orange arrow, and that should link you to a questions box. So if you have questions throughout the presentation, you can type them in right there, and then we'll go through your questions at the end to address any questions that you might have. So just an overview of what we'll be talking about today. We're going to go over the background for the assessment audit. We'll talk about flagging criteria for how we selected schools to include in the audit. We'll walk you through the inquiry form, each of those questions to break that down a little further. We'll talk about what comes after the inquiry form, and then we'll have time to answer any questions that you might have. So just for some background, GOSA audits based on the legislative requirements for accountability. We are required to present our audit procedures for audits to the State Board of Education. We presented this year's criteria at the February State Board of Education meeting, and this year's audit criteria for the assessment audit was approved on February 21st. GOSA has been conducting an annual assessment audit in some form since 2009. It started with erasure analysis for the CRCT, and now it's evolved to the milestones assessment, and it incorporates some additional metrics. We'll discuss those throughout the presentation, but our overall purpose of the assessment audit has been the same, and that is to ensure the security and integrity of the testing environment. So that's some background on the assessment audit. We'll talk more specifically now about this year's process. This process has changed a bit from previous years, which you've probably noticed if you've participated in the assessment audit before. We identify schools to participate in the assessment audit based on data from the 2017-2018 Georgia milestones, which is mostly spring testing, but it also includes winter and summer end of course milestones tests. We use this data from the Data Recognition Corporation, which is Georgia's testing vendor for Georgia milestones. And we have 4 possible flags. So the first is the answer change flag, and that looks at whether a student changed their answer from the wrong answer choice to the right answer choice. That was formerly known as erasure analysis when the tests were on paper to pencil, and that has always been included as part of the assessment audit. Unusual response pattern analysis was added for the 2016 assessment audit. It's based on a research model that looks at various things like if students in the classroom had a similar block of answers to each other, or if a student answered difficult items correctly but missed easier items. And then gain score and response time analyses are new this year. Gain score matches students with their data from their testing data in previous years in English and math, and it does a significance test to compare those gains to the average gains from across the state. And response time looks at how long students in a classroom spent on their test compared to the state average. We're looking at both really short test durations as well as long test durations during the response time analysis. The process overview document on GOSA's academic auditing website includes more detailed information about how each of these analyses are calculated. And we want to iterate this super importantly. These flags on their own do not at all mean that cheating occurred. For example, gain score could be from phenomenal teaching, which is what we would love to be the case. And response time, a high response time might be the result of an internet issue. These flags only tell us classrooms that are outliers compared to the state norm. So we want to look into them a little more to make sure everything checks out. But none of these flags indicate that a school necessarily cheated. Great. So we sent you all that inquiry form, so we want to talk about that. First of all, just some logistics. This was sent to schools that had 2 or more of those flags that we just discussed. So first of all, you need to submit all of the web form information online to the link that we emailed out to you. This is a secure web form, so if you need to include any student information that explains an irregularity or anything like that, you can do that on the web form. Unfortunately, our platform doesn't have the capacity for you to save and return to your responses, which is why we provided that Word document preview as a resource, so you can draft your responses on that Word document and then just copy and paste them into the form before submitting. The form is designed for school test coordinators to complete, but district staff or other school leadership are welcome to help or support that process, especially if the test coordinator is new in their role for this year. Just make sure you have a clear plan among yourselves to make sure that that is submitted by Friday, March 15th. A quick overview of the different sections on the inquiry form. We will ask you for some contact information, details about last year's milestones administration, your plan for this year's spring milestones administration, and then we've also included sections about the Georgia Alternate Assessment 2.0 and the Access for English Language Learners 2.0 and the alternate access. We've added these sections because the U.S. Department of Education's peer review of our assessments encouraged us to expand our test monitoring to intentionally monitor special populations like students with disabilities and English language learners. So we don't have a full audit process review of data procedure set up for those assessments at this time, but we wanted to go ahead and pilot some questions about those assessments as part of our existing audit this year. So we'll dive into that form. So first, we're just asking for your contact information. A copy of the form submission will be sent to the email addresses provided for the local education agencies, director of assessments, and for the school testing coordinator once that form is submitted. The first section asks about the 2017-2018 milestones administration. So we want you to upload your administration plan and let us know if any procedures were new for that last year. We want you to describe the training. You can either type that out in the box or you can upload materials. And then let us know if teachers tested their own students or if you rotated the teachers. We also want you to let us know if any irregularities occurred. Those are any deviations from your test administration procedures or test security protocols. This portion of the form is different from previous years. We're trying to move away from this kind of, here's a data point, can you explain it, yes or no? We may or may not clear you. We're kind of going to a more holistic overview of your testing procedures and a description of any irregularities that may have occurred. So for that portion, be honest. The purpose is just for us and for you to try to understand those flags. Because the flags are just outliers in the data, we're just looking to see if there might be an explanation for those flags. In those upload test items, like this one right here, our platform only has the ability to upload one file. So if you have more than one resource that you want to include in that file, you can put them all in one folder and then compress it into a zip file. I have a brief overview of those instructions here. And again, when we send out these slides, you can refer back to that if you need help compressing those files into a zip file. So moving on with the inquiry form, the next section asks about this upcoming 2018-2019 milestones administration. So we want the dates for the spring administration, and then we want the most updated testing schedule you have. So if all you have right now are these are the dates, these are the times, we'll take that. But if you also know these subjects, these periods or blocks will be testing on these particular days, we want the most detailed file that you can provide us. We also need to know what's the earliest time that test administrators will be picking up their materials each day. We want to know about your makeup plan, and we want to know if any of the policies or trainings are new for this year. And again, you can describe those or you can upload them. The questions about your testing schedule and the time of testing will be important for a potential test monitoring visit. We'll talk a little more about that later. We also want to stress to you that we don't want to stress you out. You shouldn't have to change anything in order to participate in this audit. We just want you to be documenting the procedures that you've already started to plan for this spring, and we don't want you to feel like you have to change a bunch of things. Again, referencing that U.S. Department of Education peer review, we're going to be asking more intentionally about accommodations during the milestone testing. So we want you to check any accommodations that you plan to be giving for these milestones. If you think you may have a student who needs that accommodation, but you're not 100% sure, you can go ahead and check that off. And then there's an opportunity for you to explain if there are any accommodations that weren't listed in the above. And then we also want to know how you're training teachers for those various accommodations. A little bit more for this spring's milestones. We want to know if teachers will administer tests to their own students. It's not a requirement that you rotate teachers, but we do recommend it as a best practice if you're able to have it so that teachers are not testing their own students. That would be preferred. We want you to tell us about the storage of secure testing materials, which include test tickets for online testing. We know that this is the first year that schools are expected to be 100% online testing. So we know that there may be some exceptions for that. So if you are giving any test paper and pencil, please let us know about that. If you're giving a paper and pencil test as an accommodation, you don't need to let us know about that in this box. That'll be on the accommodation section. But if you're giving any of your regular administration tests, paper and pencil, we do want you to explain that. And then let us know when secure materials are due back to the central office, and let us know about your makeup exam schedule. The next part of the form asks about the Georgia Alternate Assessment 2.0. We want to know about the training for that. And again, you can upload those documents or describe it. And then we want to know about the administration plan, how many students you expect to be participating in that this year. We did remove the question from the web form that was on your preview about irregularities for the Georgia Alternate Assessment. That was an oversight on our part between drafting the questions and setting the deadline. So we ended up pulling that question because it does conflict, the deadline does conflict with the testing window for the Georgia Alternate Assessment. So that question is no longer a part of the inquiry form. Very similar questions for the Access for English Language Learners 2.0 and the alternate access. We want you to describe the training. You can upload the materials, let us know about the administration plan and how many students are going to be participating, and then describe any irregularities that have occurred with the access or alternate access this year. If you would like to request classroom level data related to the flags, you can email me, and I'll put my email up on the last slide to request that data. We will not be sending student level data this year. With the changes on the form, again, we're trying to move from here's a specific data point, can you explain it, to kind of a broader explanation of the whole testing process. So the student level is not needed to complete the updated inquiry form as it stands this year. The data element detail for that classroom level data is up on the academic auditing website if you want to check it out and see what kind of data you would be getting from that classroom level data request. In those spreadsheets, the criteria that GOSA uses for flagging is highlighted. When you're looking at the data file, it does not mean that the test administrator, those students, or the students' teachers did anything wrong. It just means that that classroom happens to be an outlier compared to the state norm. So after you've submitted that inquiry form on March 15th, GOSA will review the inquiry forms. We might have follow-up questions for you, but we don't expect that to be a common occurrence. After we review the inquiry forms, we will be selecting schools to monitor partially based on the form responses, but we'll also be selecting some schools randomly. So if you get monitored, it doesn't mean we think you cheated or that your form responses weren't good enough, because we are selecting some schools just at random as well. We will not tell you ahead of time whether or not you will be monitored, so just make sure that you have great testing procedures in place, like I'm sure you are already planning to do. If you are monitored, a GOSA staff member will arrive before the testing coordinator begins distributing materials. They'll ask to see how materials are secured and stored, and they'll watch materials be checked out to the different teachers, test administrators. Once testing begins, they'll ask the testing coordinator a few questions about students testing with accommodations, and then they'll observe classrooms from the hallway. We've trained our monitors to be as unobtrusive as possible. We don't want to stress you out or disrupt your testing process. After testing, they'll return to the testing coordinator station to watch materials be checked in as well. And then once all of the testing for that day has concluded, they will leave for the day. So we'll set aside time now for questions. I see we've already got some popping up in the box, so we'll go through and answer some of those questions. The academic auditing website that's linked here, that's the landing page for all of the different resources that I've mentioned today. And then this is my contact information, email address, and phone number. So if you have general questions about the audit, you can type those into the question box. And again, you can access that from the orange arrow on your GoToWebinar menu. If you have questions that are more specific to your district or to your school, I'll ask that you send me those in an email rather than in the webinar box. And again, I will post the slides and the recording of this webinar on that academic auditing website, the link that's right there, this afternoon, so that you can access the slides and this information again. So I'm just going to pull up the question. Let's see. All right, I'm just expanding my view to make sure I can read the whole questions here in the box. All right, so it asks if there's a question about if the access questions are mandatory. So if you don't have a need to administer access or GAA at your school, then you can just answer that in the questions. The questions are a required part of the web form. So if you are not giving those, you can just write that in the box that you don't have any students participating in those assessments this year. But if you are administering that test this year, then you must answer those questions. A question was the information being shared is just for the school being audited, not for the system. That is correct. So when you're answering questions about the number of teachers trained for the Georgia Alternate Assessment for access, those are just for the school that's participating in the audit. Question again is if you're flagged for milestones, do you still have to complete the questions for GAA and access? The answer is yes. We don't have the data yet from GAA and access to be able to flag schools for those administrations. We haven't developed that process yet. So we're just piloting those questions with the schools that we're already in contact with for milestones. This question says, if someone comes in person to the school, is it just one day or could it be multiple days? It will just be one day during the testing administration. But again, that will be unannounced. So make sure you have great processes in place throughout your whole testing period. This question asks if you'll have to answer specific questions related to the classroom level data that's highlighted in yellow or green on that classroom level data file if you requested it. You don't have to speak to exactly those highlighted classrooms. If, as you're filling out the irregularities portion, if you happen to know of an instance that's relevant to those classrooms, please share that with us. but we're not going to ask you to look specifically at the flagged instances and comment on those classrooms or students specifically. This next question here asks, if you upload your materials, do you still have to provide an explanation? Great question. You don't have to provide that explanation if you are uploading. That question is marked as required on the form, so you can just say, refer to the attachments. We uploaded them in your response. This next question says, should you submit a questionnaire for each school flagged for the audit? So yes, each school should be submitting their own web form. So if you're supporting from a district level, you can ask that the school testing coordinator, or you can submit one web form for each individual school. I've spoken with some districts that they have a very similar training process for like the Georgia alternate assessment, for example. So if you're using a district level training guide, that's fine. The responses can be similar across the district. If some of those resources are the same, that overlap is okay. I have a question about where can I find this handout? If that is the preview form, if you'll just send me an email, that was sent out to the district level testing coordinators, but if you need another copy of that, you can send it to me and I'll get that for you. And then we'll be posting these slides on the website if that's what you're referencing. If not, if you can type a follow-up question about which handout you mean, and I'll be happy to answer that question. This question asks if response time outliers are affected by students not ending or submitting the test properly. So that could have been that could be one of the instances that affects response time analysis. So if you happen to know of a case where the student finished testing, but it didn't end up closing out for whatever reason, then please let us know about that in that box that asks about irregularities during the 2017-2018 administration. And again, we'll send a video. This next question asks about if a test coordinator isn't in attendance. We will post this on the GOSA website, and then we will also email it out to the list of attendees who are registered for this webinar, so you guys can get that information as well. I think I've reached the end of my question queue for right now. I will hang out a couple more minutes. Let's see, you got a new question. District has not administered Georgia alternate assessment yet, so the plan hasn't been developed. So the Georgia alternate assessment window is coming up around the corner. So if you can go ahead and share with us what training that you do have, and if you want to wait as close to March 15th as you can, or if you want to say that's still being developed and then send it to us when you do have a more thorough test training process set up, that would be fine as well. This question asks if a response time is a negative number and highlighted as a flag. That means that it took significantly less time than the state average. So the standard scores that we're sending you, the state average is represented by 0. And then those deviations are, positive deviations are longer than the state average, and those negative deviations are significantly less than the state average. Okay, this next question says, if a teacher has significant gains on EOG results, will that result in a possible flag for unusual response pattern analysis? So the gains from year to year are one of the factors that play into unusual response analysis. But there are other factors as well, like students having similar blocks of answers, or students getting difficult questions right and missing easy questions. So in order for them to get the unusual response pattern flag, there has to be high instance in both of those. But if a teacher has significant gains, that more directly relates to the gain score analysis. Another question about, we'll share this PowerPoint on the GOSA academic auditing website. I'm at the end of my question queue again, so I'll wait for about 5 more minutes to see if there are any other questions that pop up. We'll just, yeah, otherwise you're welcome to head on with your day if you feel like you're in a good place with having your questions answered. And then as always, contact information is on the screen. Feel free to call or email me with any questions that you have or any questions that are specific to your school or district. We appreciate you all taking the time to be with us today. Okay, we have a question that says, is there an expectation for modifications of testing procedures at the conclusion of the web form? And we're not expecting to have any issues with requesting to change. Again, we don't want to stress you out or make you feel like you're having to revise your entire testing process. We just want you to document and let us know what you are planning. Another question is asking in the answer change analysis spreadsheet, and that's for schools that have requested that classroom level data, what does Z_WTR mean? That is the standard score for the wrong to right analysis. So it's not exactly like standard deviation because it's modified to control for class size, but you can sort of interpret it in a similar way that Z-score is how far away from the mean that classroom was. And there's a more technical breakdown of each column in that spreadsheet up on the academic auditing website. All right, another question about that. There are 4 indicators for the second index on unusual response pattern. How do we find out which indicator applied to us? So on the spreadsheet for unusual response pattern, those there's 4 columns that say quantitative regression measure. And so it's measure 1, measure 2, measure 3, and measure 4. And the column breakdown on the GOSA website will explain what each of those 4 measures looks at. So on your spreadsheet, each of those measures is on a scale of 0 to 1. 0 means that it falls in line in an expected way with the state mean. The closer that number is to 1, it gets more unusual. That indicates more of a variance from the state mean. A question about where to request specific data about the flag. If you want just a more specific description of the flag, you can look at the process overview online. If you want to request your school or district specific data, just send me an email and I'll be happy to put together that file for you. Got a question that says, do I have an approximate turnaround time for sending classroom level data after I receive the email? I can usually get those responses out if I'm at my email within an hour. So if it's during the regular workday, you can expect those pretty quickly. If you send it after the workday, probably the next morning. This next question asks if you guys will receive any type of report or response from the inquiry form. We won't be responding to at the inquiry form level. We will be posting our final audit report after the spring administration concludes. So that's after the inquiry form and after test monitoring. And then for schools that are referenced in the report, there will be a 30-day comment window. So we will send you the part of the report that pertains to your school or your district and let you know when that 30-day window will close. And then if you have any comments about what we've reported, you're welcome to comment on that before we make that report finalized and published. This next question asks if it's unusual for a teacher to be flagged on one form of the test and not the other. I don't have like a statistical breakdown in how common that might be to give you an exact answer for that question. So like a Form A flag versus a Form B flag, I'm not sure exactly how common that is, But again, because these flags are just outliers in the data, it might just be a happenstance for one. We have a question that asks if you need to comment on specifics from the classroom level report. You do not need to comment specifically on the flagged classrooms. However, if you do know of an irregularity that may have affected that classroom specifically, then please do let us know about that in the question. It's in the 2017-2018 form that just says to explain any irregularities during the administration. So it's not a requirement to comment on those classroom level flags, but if you do have some information that's relevant to those classrooms, please let us know. We give that classroom level data just for additional context, but it's also not required. We feel like the entire inquiry form can be completed without that classroom level data. All right, so it's been a while since our last question, so I'm going to go ahead and close out the webinar for today. Again, thank you so much for all of those who were able to join us or who are watching this recording after the fact. If I happen to miss your question or if you have any other questions, please feel free to call or email me and I will be happy to answer those for you. Thank you so much. Everyone have a great Wednesday. Bye-bye.